Hello there, traveler. Whether you're searching for the sun setting in the eastern sky, a pleasant afternoon underneath a fig tree, immortal, eternal, cosmic release, or maybe just a friendly hello, I hope you're doing well. Taking a moment to come back to the present moment, experiencing the sights and sounds, the stimulations, the sensations of wherever you're at. Is it noisy? Is it quiet? Is it bustling, full of life, or is it still? What is your mind-body connection with this? Do you feel at peace in the environment you're at? Do you feel comfortable? Aroused by different stimulations? Or maybe a little defendant, tugging away? None of these are inherently right or wrong, but understanding what your relationship with your environment is not always an easy thing to do. For better or for worse, we live in a world that prioritizes different transactions and utilizations and maximizations of time and place. It can be difficult to actually slow down. I at least know in my personal journey, slowing down has had to have been an intentional focus. I think that's pretty clear here on the descent. Taking the time to be is not easy. When we have these ingrained sense of urgencies, needing to get this, that, or done, surviving's hard. We often come up with different stories, trying to come up with different explanations of what all this means. What is the qualifying reasons? And I do want to give a little bit of a shout out to one of my favorite books that I've read. The History of Heaven and Hell by Bart Ehrman. It takes a pretty good approach to the quite literal human origins of our conceptions of the afterlife. Traditionally, in a Western sense, going back through Jewish traditions, specifically to where the Christian current notion of heaven and hell is. Going back to Greco-Roman era as well, all these different influences that constructed essentially with the modern day, these different versions of heaven and hell are. For me, I personally grew up in the Jewish tradition. I went to my Sunday school and my Hebrew school, right? And so, not really a big conversation point of heaven or hell in that tradition. Now, I definitely had my time in the propaganda machines, right? And had to definitely go through a lot of deconstruction and understanding the biases that I grew up with, and very much understanding that the version of the 6-Day War that I was told, or the War of Liberation, I didn't know about it as the Nakba as a kid, right? Those are all terms that I had to learn and understand and deconstruct on my own. And similarly, the advantage, I think, though, of not growing up in a tradition that where heaven and hell was prioritized or canonized in this way that it is in Christianity, right? I think that the concept of literally heaven and hell always really interested me because it was just never taught to me, right? It was something that I had to like learn culturally, honestly, through like going to school and public school and just being part of the predominantly Christian culture. They were not taught to me in a religious sense or like in a worldview sense. They were taught to me as this kind of like cultural thing, right? So being able to take, I think, this really anthropological approach to the origins of heaven and hell is really why I really enjoyed the read by Bart Ehrman. Again, the history of heaven and hell. All this extrapolation is to go into basically saying that, I was someone who never really had their own mortal version of hell, right? I was never someone who conceptualized it that way. It was just all these different fantastical concepts, right? And this very story, it was the story of hell quite literally was always a story to me, right? And it wasn't because it was not a part of my upbringing. It wasn't a part of how I viewed the world. So it was always this concept to me. And I think that brings us to this week's question of the week. Plain and simple, it is, what is your favorite version of hell? And I always like to have a joke in my personal life with my friends and everything like that, if there is a hell, I'll meet you next to the super high unreachable cupcake table. Now, I wish that was an original statement, but it's stolen from Scrubs, and I think that that's kind of where my first kind of conceptions of hell really came from is, like I said, watching TV shows and specifically like sitcoms, and these people talking about hell, right? So I always like to think of hell as being this place where there's literally a super high unreachable cupcake table, and that's going to be the meeting point. I think that as I've grown more fantastical in my media consumption and a lot more in the fantasy genres, I am a big fan right now. I'm reading the current book series Crescent City, and they have a couple different versions of hell that it seems like it's pretty ontological with the kind of like underworldish. I don't know about specifically Fire and Brimstone, but kind of similar within definitely in the school of like Dante, like the colder, the darker, the farther down you go, the colder it gets in the pit and the darker it is. And there's the different princes and everything like that, and these insane beasts, but they're not inherently like these places of demonic suffering or like eternal souls going down or whatever, but like are actually this different realm and these different places that have been enslaved in. Like, I don't know, I really enjoy like kind of this different like world. It's like, again, I very much like the views that are non or are essentially heretical to Christian views, right? That hell is not this place of suffering or anything like that, but are these places that have been enslaved similar to as humanity has, right? I very much would like the literary interpretations that the angels and God, Christian God and everything like that are, especially if you're reading some of the Old Testament stuff, or when they like withheld knowledge, the fall and everything like that, that the good guys are actually the ones that fell and everything like that. There's plenty of new media that's coming out like that, like with It Has Been Hotel and everything like that, and then all these different just kind of reinterpretations of these views, because when you get into the history of hell and everything like that, realizing that like Revelations just kind of came out of nowhere and everything like that, and all these and have very human origins and everything to them. So ultimately, when I think of like my favorite conception of hell, right, I love then also going on like this mushroom trip existential side of things as well, where it's like, what is like actual suffering? What is that darkness? And then like, growing up in recovery community and hearing about people have their own conceptions of their experiences of hell when they overdose and things like that, and it just being nothing and everything like that. I think that is probably the ultimate thing that I can think of version of suffering, right? As a social creature, as a human, just that disconnection, just that isolation, those that stillness, that whatever, those things, right? That I think is suffering, right? And everything like that. And I can very much understand that as a version of hell, right? That's fascinating to me, is like that. I don't know, again, if we're talking about it in terms of morality and like punishment or something like that. Like, I think if it is in those binary of the thing, that is like the deepest version of how I can understand this. Some version of whatever deep disconnection, trauma, isolation, or whatever like that, and that experience of it, that's a very real thing. And I think that very much touches again to what humans think suffering is the most, right? That inherent disconnection and stuff like that. And so I think ultimately that kind of gets me to what like my favorite version of hell is, right? If I was talking about in some of these different cultural concepts and all these different mashups and all these different things, I think that, my favorite version of hell, honestly, if I'm being quite honest, is just the human story of it. I think that the version of hell that I really just connect to is that it's this object that we create, and we use it to interpret these different points of suffering as a retribution, and as this point as to describe these really hard feelings. I love the metaphor of hell itself, right? I love that it's trying to rationalize a very disorganized, complex system that we don't understand, and trying to make sense of what we are scared by, or fascinated by, or believe in. We use it as a point of reference, as a story of liberation, as uprising against enslaving masters. I don't believe in, obviously, a God that has the morality and to care that if you try to take care of your fellow people, they're going to send you to a place of punishment, or these insane things that I see in our different cultures and everything like that, where people take these different versions to be quite literal. I think that is probably the scariest version of hell, is someone who genuinely believes in the implications of what that can mean sometimes. But the fact that hell itself is this point, whether it's in a Western or Eastern or whatever indigenous version of a place of suffering, I guess is what I want to qualify it as. I think understanding that like point of reference of what that person's version of that is such a interesting version of hell. And I think that, again, lucky enough growing up and being part of a tradition that didn't inherently view that as the end all be all, really being able to use that as that different point to understand where someone's coming at and everything like that, and being able to understand what their view of the world is and how to be able to, honestly connect with them a little bit better, right? I think that's always my favorite version of hell. I think it's really interesting, right? Because that story is so individual to the different persons you're talking to. And travel, wherever you might be in this time and place, wherever you might be experiencing, enjoying, running from. I hope you're able to be just here. Oh, I'm hoping I'm able to just be here just too. There's a lot of suffering still in this existence as far as I'm aware. So there's still work to do. But that doesn't change the fact that you are loved and you are enough.